Welcome back to another ZX Spectrum compilation chart challenge. The way the release schedule has fallen means this video is going to be live around New Year's Day 2026, so I thought I'd do something special and make an extended episode where I look at one of the Spectrum compilation Big Hitter series. I put a few polls up online to choose between the Best of Elite, 4 Crash Smashes and They Sold a Million, and if I'm being really honest, I was hoping for an Elite win, but it didn't, and who am I to argue? Taking the lion's share of the vote was Ocean's They Sold a Million, so I'll be looking at all 12 games from the 3 releases shortly. But first, I thought I'd give you a look at some of my latest compilation pickups that might get a review at some point in the future. The collection is well into triple figures now with 119 compilations, and I thought I'd share a couple that I picked up at the recent Crash Live event. First up is Movie Premiere from Elite, which was a late compilation as it was released in 1992. The games are obviously all old movie titles and of varying quality, but I'd never seen this pack before and may well do an episode on movie based compilations in the new year. The other one I wanted to share is the Top 10 collection. This was released by Elite on their hip pack branding, but it's very different to their normal style. Released in '88, it bears more resemblance to a vinyl music collection than games, and it has a lovely gatefold cover. The games are mostly from Durrell after Elite bought out the rights to their back catalogue, and games like Saboteur, Lotus Esprit, Combat Links and Thanatos are all there. I'll almost certainly be doing a review of this one, so watch this space. But let's get back to the main feature. Ocean's They Sold a Million series of compilations launched just before Christmas in 1985, and it was big news with the gaming press at the time. Home Computing Weekly even put it on their front cover in September '85 when they announced that the first They Sold a Million would be released on the Hitsville label and feature Set Willy, Attic Attack, Daley Thompson's Decathlon and Beachhead, quoting David Ward of Ocean, who said that the software producers had worked together to give the public a really good deal for Christmas, and noted that although the industry is often portrayed as backstabbing, this proves that they're capable of working in harmony. By the next issue of the weekly magazine, the lineup of games and the label had already changed, so Home Computing Weekly had to print a correction advising that Attic Attack would now be replaced by Sabre Wulf, and that the new package would now be released by the Hit Squad rather than Hitsville. I'll review and score each of the compilations separately, but I'll also average the release scores out to give an overall series rating at the end. And if you're interested in finding out more about the accuracy of Ocean's claim that they sold a million, then why not check out my article on the compilationzx.com website. But to kick off the reviews, let's have a look at the packaging. Okay, so let's have a look at They Sold a Million. There they are in all their glory. The 3 boxes are all fairly uniform, so I'm going to try and review them together, just calling out the main differences. But let's have a look at the fronts first. And They Sold a Million. It's in this lovely blue design with a little snowy effect on it. It's got the They Sold a Million in gold up here and the 4 game posters, and also up here it's got the 4 software houses that produce those games. We have the Hit Squad branding at the bottom, and then over here it says giant compilation featuring all these hits. So a really nice cover. I like it. I like the snow effects. It was a Christmas release, so that's nice. Spine's not so great though. We've got Spectrum 48K down there in huge letters. We've got a little Hit Squad logo and then the best group of hits in games history, but it doesn't say They Sold a Million anywhere, which is a bit disappointing. It is one of the half-back ones because it was a solid back case. And looking inside, we get the front cover and then a poster version of the front cover and no information at all, and nothing on the back. So it's a really big wasted opportunity on the inside. It is exactly the same on the inside of all of them. They all have this poster on an angle, and that's it. So yeah, bit strange that. Moving on to number 2, and we've got the same thing, but this is a purpley colour. Now this was an Easter release, but it's still got the snowy background, which is a little bit odd, but I like this cover maybe even more than the first one. It's still got all the same design elements. We've now got the 4 monster hits as a bit of a designed image, but yeah, really nice again, following the same format. Still the same on the spine with 48K in big letters. It's slightly smaller, but it's still too big. Hit Squad, and this one says oops, I've got it upside down, and this one says 4 monster hits, and again, no mention of They Sold a Million, and it's They Sold a Million II, or 2, but then we get to the third one, and you just hope they follow through on the theme, and they decide not to, and they've, instead of keeping up with the Roman numerals, we've gone to #3 or number 3, and the 3's massive, so that means that the posters have to be rearranged in a different order, which means you have all this wasted space down the middle and tiny writing. Posters are smaller, they're more covered up by each other. I just think it's really disappointing, this cover, after the lovely first 2. Also, the colouring's not great. I think it's supposed to look like fire, but I don't know, it just looks dark and washed out to me. Now, there is a little bit of writing there in red that says Spectrum 48K and 128K, which is really bad colour choice because you can hardly see it. Can you see that? But the spine's worse. Hit Squad, 4 #1 blockbusters. Again, no They Sold a Million. And look at that. That's so hard to read. The Spectrum 48K, 128K. Red on an orange background just is not a good choice. So, yeah, bit of a disappointment, that third case, especially after the first 2 being so nice and so well following through on the theme. But that's that. Let's have a look at the inside. We have They Sold a Million, They Sold a Million 2, and They Sold a Million 3. Rather boring tapes that just say the name of the compilation, but at least it says the name of the compilation, and the games, which are 1 game on each side of the tape. The only difference being the third one that's got a couple of Hit Squad logos on there. And the only thing to say there is they use 3 different fonts, which is a pet peeve of mine when they don't follow through, but that's that. So let's have a look now at the instruction manuals. All 3 are fold outs, all 3 are slightly different sizes, and one of the biggest differences for all of them is font sizes. So this is the first one, nice large font. All the games have got everything you'd need, loading instructions, tips for how to play them, keys and everything you could need. So this is a really nice instruction sheet for They Sold a Million. On the reverse, we've got French language, but can you see that? Much smaller font, and the reason for that is this huge Hit Squad label at the bottom. I'm not sure it was quite necessary that you needed it that big, that they had to reduce the font size by about 4 or 5 points. So unlucky to our French cousins who will struggle with their eyes for that one. But then we have the second one. The second one is a little bit different in that it's already smaller font for the English language. It's still got all the information there, exactly the same. 1 full page for the UK, well, English language. But then for the foreign language, it's a bit odd because you turn it that way and then you have to rotate. So they've gone for a portrait for the English language. Oh, wrong way again. Portrait for the English language, but then landscape for foreign language, which is French and German. So because they've stuck 2 on there, really tiny, which, yeah, I would really struggle to read the non-English language version for They Sold a Million 2. They Sold a Million 3, I like this, it folds and you get the logo on the front. That's a good sign to start with, so let's see if it gets any better. The answer's no. Look how small that is. And that's the English language version this time. Fighter Pilot here, that's the game that you're going to need the instructions for, or I am anyway. And they're so tiny, I'm struggling to read them. I really struggle. I was going to say that I may have said that this was English language. It's not. This is all languages. Each game has English, French, and it also has some loading instructions for different systems on there as well. So this has tried to be all manuals for all people, but it just means everything is tiny. So really disappointing. It started well with a nice little logo and then everything fell apart. It's got all the information you need, it's just you can't read it. So yeah, disappointing. And that's the instruction manuals. So on the whole, 1 and 2, Really nice looking, a little bit of niggles, but really nice packaging. The third one, bit of a letdown. But let's see how the games go. The first They Sold a Million launched on 1st of November 1985 for the very reasonable price of £9.95, and the 4 games were all #1 bestsellers, and they included Daley Thompson's Decathlon, Beachhead, Jet Set Willy and Sabre Wulf. It was also released on the Amstrad, where Jet Set Willy was specially converted just for the compilation. On the Commodore 64 there was a change, as Sabre Wulf was replaced by Staff of Carnath. There was also one further release for the German market, where the war-themed Beachhead was replaced by Spy Hunter. For this review, we're going to concentrate on the standard Spectrum release. If anyone doesn't know about Jet Set Willy, then you've probably got the wrong channel. Released by Software Projects in '84 as a sequel to the smash hit Manic Miner, Jet Set Willy expands on the traditional platformer template laid out by Manic Miner in a number of ways. Miner Willy has been reaping the benefits of his previous discovery, and now has a yacht, a cliff-top mansion, an Italian housekeeper, a French chef and hundreds of new friends who just want to party. Housekeeper Maria takes a dim view of all this revelry and kicks all the partygoers out and demands Willy clears up his mess before he goes to bed. But Willy hasn't explored all of his mansion properly yet, and it's huge, so whilst the general theme remains the same, collecting the flashing objects scattered around the screens, this is now a very large mappable arcade adventure. Software Projects was so confident of the challenge that Jet Set Willy presented that they offered a case of champagne and a helicopter ride to the first person to write in and confirm how many collectibles were needed before Maria would let Willy sleep. But as the initial copies of the game confirmed a number of game-breaking bugs, I'm not sure anyone actually won the prize. Luckily, the version on They Sold a Million is fully bug-fixed, but of course I've never been anywhere near completing it. In fact, I'd never been a particular fan, preferring the linear nature of Manic Miner to the exploration and backtracking here. But playing the game for the first time in what must be 20 years has actually given me a newfound respect for the game. And Matt Smith should be applauded for not resting on his laurels and creating a Manic Miner 2. He built a brand new game that, whilst familiar, is a full evolution of his earlier work. The large map with some screens having multiple branches means that I'm still finding new things every time I play, and while some screens are fiendishly difficult, the generous number of lives you start with means that trial and error is possible without constantly having to restart. And when I loaded up Jet Set Willy to play it for this review, I was expecting to remain as underwhelmed as I had been in the 80s, but I was very pleasantly surprised, and I've seen my view on the game take a 180, so I'm going to score Jet Set Willy 8 out of 10. Beachhead, created by Bruce Carver and released by US Gold in 1984, is a conversion of the Commodore 64 original that had the honour of being the first ever Commodore 64 game to top the multi-system charts. Featuring a wonderful F. David Thorpe loading screen, the game's a multi-event wartime shooter, where you must storm the beaches of an enemy stronghold after first putting paid to their air and sea defences. All of its 5 levels are provided in a single load, and the presentation and graphics are of a very high standard. Before heading into level 1, you're presented with a strategic dilemma. Do you face the enemy head on, or do you attempt to sneak through a secret passage, represented on this map screen as a flashing square in the top left? The hidden passage level will make your later missions easier, but comes with the risk of lives lost, as you must guide each of your ships through mine-infested waters. Luckily, the collision detection is spot on for this level, and at least on the easier skill levels you should be able to get all your ships through unharmed. But as your ships power their way to the landing site, the enemy scramble their warplanes from the fleet of battleships just outside the bay. Using your ship's gun turrets, you must change the elevation of your guns to take out 10 planes if you went through the hidden passage, or 30 planes if you did not. The graphics are really well done for this level, and I love the way you can see the tiny planes taking off from the aircraft carrier and getting bigger and bigger as they fly towards you. So with the air defences downed, it's time to take out the fleet. Again, using elevation controls, you have to launch bombs at the 5 ships. With every miss, you're given a summary of your accuracy, which you can use to recalculate for your next attack. For every 100 metres, you must increase or decrease your trajectory by half a degree, depending on whether you were long or short. With the last of the fleet destroyed, we move on to the land invasion, as our tanks rumble onto the beach. Simply avoid the mines, barriers and other obstacles, as well as enemies' tanks and turrets, to reach the General's bunker. From here, you must shoot all the highlighted targets before the huge cannon can be turned into position to fire on you. Fail to destroy the bunker and another tank will be sent to repeat the foolhardy mission. And that is Beachhead, a great collection of themed minigames with bags of atmosphere, excellent graphics and great presentation. And with 3 skill levels, it's got a good amount of replayability too, so I'm scoring it 8 points. Like the rest of the games on this package, Sabre Wulf needs little introduction. Released in 1984, it was the first outing of Sabreman, who would go on to feature in 3 more games from creators Ultimate Play the Game. Sabreman must escape a very large jungle maze by collecting 4 pieces of a sacred amulet, whilst evading the wolf and all manner of other jungle hazards, like rhinos, natives and killer plants. Obtaining all 4 pieces of the amulet will give Sabreman access to the fabled underworld, and thus leads neatly into the sequel. And like most of the Ultimate games, the high production values meant that the games carried a high retail price of £10, when most full price games of the time were between £6 and £8. So I never actually bought any of them and relied on copies of the games off my mates. But therein lies the issue. With no packaging to provide guidance and no jeopardy for giving up, as I wouldn't be losing any cash, I just didn't give them a fair crack of the adventurer's whip. So these reviews are an opportunity for me to put that straight, and spending some time with Sabreman, I've come to realise that the Ultimate games, or at least this one, are not just style over substance as I had originally thought. A simple enough maze game, the bright colourful graphics are a great start, and the wide variety of enemies, some that can be killed and some that can only be shooed away, plus the fast and smooth animation, makes for far more arcade action than I was expecting. With various indigenous plants giving different abilities like invulnerability and super speed, plus your trusty sword which is wielded like Sabreman's well trained in fencing, you're given a fair chance of survival. And though it can be infuriating not being able to attack when travelling up or down, I never felt cheated, even if I did only ever manage to get 1 piece of the amulet. My experience of Sabreman means that I'm now quite looking forward to trying Nightlaw on They Sold a Million too, and for its great presentation and fun gameplay, I'm going to award Sabre Wulf 8 points. Daley Thompson was big news in 1984. As the reigning Olympic champion, he headed to LA for the 23rd Summer Olympiad for a showdown with his big rival, Jürgen Hingsen. Daley came away with another gold and what would eventually be recalculated as a world record score. But that's not all. On the same day in August that he was winning the title, Ocean Software released a Commodore 64 game bearing Daley's name. The Spectrum version wouldn't come out for another month or 2, and there would be some notable differences, such as being only 1 player, and also being split into 2 loads with 5 events each. An obvious rip-off of Konami's arcade game Track and Field, the game was graced with wonderful Bob Wakeling cover art that was skillfully turned into an iconic loading screen by F. David Thorpe. And despite missing the Olympic fever of the summer, the Spectrum version would become a huge seller, easily outselling its Commodore rival. So let's have a look at the events and see what the fuss was all about. Featuring a large main sprite that looks nothing at all like Daley, though the parallax scrolling and excitable crowd do add to the atmosphere. The 100 metres is a simple joystick waggler or keyboard basher. Beat the qualifying time to ensure you don't lose one of your 3 lives. Long jump is all about speed and trajectory. Keep your pace in the magenta and your angle around 45 degrees and you should be all good. Shot put is a bit of a cheat, in that you get a run up rather than a circle to spin in, so it feels very similar to the long jump, but you will need a different angle, and watch out you don't step over that line. High jump is the first event that can be tricky to master, initially anyway. Speed is controlled by the computer, and the trick is to start your jump as close to the bar as possible. Let Daley get well above, and then bring your angle down sharply to move him towards the mat. After quite a few failed attempts, I was really pleased when this event started to click. The last event on day 1 is the 400 metres. Another button basher joystick waggler. You'll need some stamina to get through the full 400 metres in the magenta. I'm using a ZX Next keyboard, which is similar to the Spectrum Plus or Spectrum 128. But I do remember playing the game a lot on the rubber keyed Specky, and that was a much harder slog, as was the Competition Pro joystick I had back then. If you complete the 5 events with lives to spare, you're treated to a nice rendition of the Chariots of Fire theme. I wonder if Vangelis got any royalties for that. You then get to replay day 1 with harder qualifying requirements until your lives are gone. It's a shame there wasn't an option to carry over your score into day 2, but to all intents and purposes, that's a separate game altogether. After resetting and loading day 2, we enter our name again and crack on with the other 5 events. First is the 110 metre hurdles, and it's a fairly difficult affair to keep up your speed and time those jumps just right. But luckily, with the reload, our lives have reset too. Whilst the pole vault initially looks quite similar to the high jump, it's much simpler to master. Time the planting of your pole just right, wait for Daley to clear the height of the bar, and then sail down to the mat. Shame we don't get Daley's trademark backflip after a successful jump though. Discus sees an overhead view, where you spin as your speed increases. Time your throw just right so that you're facing the opening and hit a good angle to see your discus fly. Javelin is another familiar run and throw event, but it's one that I've always enjoyed, as the effective changes to your angle are clear to see. And the joy of getting close to that magic 100 metres is hard to beat. The final event is the gruelling 1500 metres. But it isn't just a waggle fest. Instead, you must control your speed and conserve energy to make sure you make it through the full race. And preferably with enough in the tank for a sprint finish. Unfortunately, I was relying on memory when I played this event and forgot that it's the fire button to decrease your speed. That meant that poor Daley just sprinted the first 400 metres and collapsed from exhaustion. Though to be fair, Daley Thompson himself struggled with the event and had to go big on earlier events to make sure he had a lead going into it. So after replaying all the events, I can say that I enjoyed all 10. It's disappointing that we couldn't have a second player, even if they just took turns, and Decathlon was improved upon by some of the later releases. But in 2025, as in 1985, I really enjoyed playing it, and I'm happy to award it 8 points. Whilst Crash did acknowledge the release of They Sold a Million in its issue 50 compilation roundup, none of the magazines offered a proper review, so let's just crack on and get my scores on the doors. So as you've heard, the individual games all scored 8, making the average game score very simple maths. However, due to at least 2 of the games leaning towards a 9, and the fact that the consistency of the pack should be rewarded, I'm giving 1 extra bonus point, which means our average game score now becomes 8.25. I was on the whole impressed with the packaging, particularly for this first release, so that scored an 8. And the total points scored is 33 from a compilation that cost £9.95, so that works out at 30 pence per point, which converts to a 7. So when we use our fingers and toes, we find out that They Sold a Million Volume 1 scores 79.5%, just 0.5% off getting the first ZXCCC Mega Hit Award, but still grabbing a Mega Pack. We'll look at the league tables later, so let's move on to Volume 2. After the stellar sales of the first volume, Ocean moved quickly to get another release out for the next major holiday, and They Sold a Million 2 was on the shelves by Easter. Still priced at £9.95 for Spectrum, Amstrad and C64, the Commodore version once again substituted the Ultimate game, this time switching to Entombed, but for the rest of us, the lineup was Bruce Lee, Match Point, Night Law and Match Day. Including 2 sports games may have been quite risky, but both were very highly rated, and the 2 action-adventure games were also classics in their own right. Datasoft's Bruce Lee was released in the UK by US Gold, but the Spectrum port was actually coded in-house at Ocean and released in the first half of 1985. Set in ancient Japan, in view of Mount Fuji, and taking control of the martial arts master, he must penetrate the evil wizard's lair and face off against the deadly foe to claim his enormous wealth, so not exactly a noble quest. Unfortunately, the deeper levels of the wizard's fortress are closed off, and the only way to open them is to clear the area of hanging lanterns. But watch out for Green Yamo, who's actually white in this version, and the wizard's ninja protectors, who can be knocked down but will take multiple hits before becoming temporarily paralysed. Throughout the rooms there are many hazards, such as electrical charges and exploding singlin bushes, as well as ladders, waterfalls and vines that can be climbed. Bruce is a hardy fella and can take 3 hits before he loses a life, but with Yamo and the ninja never far away, that's a good thing. Though small and fairly crude, the graphics all have character, and the minimal use of colour has been done really well. The screens are never too taxing, and it's a game that most will probably complete if they persevere. But it's a game that's always fun every time I go back to it, with the only annoyance being that you have to jump straight up to enable you to climb, and can't enter ladders from the side, which can be a bit tricky sometimes and often causes you to get caught by Yamo or the ninja, or both. An interesting extra feature for the game is that there are a number of multiplayer gameplay options, allowing you to play against a human opponent where you take turns as Bruce or Yamo, switching characters every 5 deaths, or play 2 players versus the computer, where you take turns controlling Bruce against the computer's Yamo, or if there are 3 of you, then 2 can take turns as Bruce against the third as Yamo. These are interesting additions that help to prolong the fun of a fine platforming adventure. And whilst I can't bestow the wizard's untold riches, I can give Bruce Lee 8 points. Released by Sinclair Research just as the 1984 Wimbledon tournament was starting, Matchpoint took the press by storm. It scored a CMVG Game of the Month, a Crash Smash, and a PCG hit, with many reviewers exclaiming just how far computer games had come from the lowly days of Pong to a full-blown interactive tennis simulation. And even now it's hard to argue with many of the superlatives thrown at the game, as it takes the limitations of the machine and crafts a game that comfortably sits within them, but certainly not within itself. Boasting many options from a simple and elegant menu, you can choose your skill by beginning in the quarterfinals, semi-finals or final. You can also choose between 1, 3 or 5 sets and whether you want to play against a computer or a human opponent. Matchpoint even gives you the option to watch an exhibition match where 2 computer-controlled players battle it out. These exhibition games can be surprisingly engaging, especially to give you a quick break after a grueling 3-set match of your own. You also get to name your character and that of your opponent, and it's a nice touch, and I'm sure many will have entered John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors to recreate the Wimbledon final of that year. The actual match graphics at first appear merely functional, but once you get into the game you do appreciate them much more. The faux 3D perspective works well, the players are animated nicely, and other touches like ball boys running across the screen and the crowd turning their heads as shots are played all feed into the realism. And talking of realism, despite being an early title, there's been no scrimping on the rules either. Many football games of the time had pitches with very few markings, but the full tennis court is present here. As are all of the rules. Double faults, deuce, advantage, tie breaks, it's all present. And it'd take a number of years before any tennis game could come close to Matchpoint. With the hindsight of Virtua Tennis and other more modern offerings, we can see some limitations, such as not being able to select different shot types. Whilst lobs and smashes are here, they are chosen when appropriate by the computer, and the auto change from back to forehand when running causes more issues than it solved. But for 1984 this was a simulation with a capital S, and will always hold a place in my gamer's heart, and I can't score it any less than 8 points. By the time Matchday was released at Christmas in 1984, John Rittman was already a well-respected programmer, having released a number of games for Arctic Computing and Design software. However, John himself has admitted that he's no innovator, preferring to take inspiration from others and building the best possible game from existing game types, such as Namtir Raiders, Space Invaders, Cosmic Debris, Asteroids, 3D Combat Zone, Battle Zone, and Bear Bother, which was an excellent spin on the Burger Time coin-op, and would become an important element in the Matchday story. By reusing his large character sprites from Bear Bother, simply changing the clothes and giving them a haircut, John was able to massively reduce his workload, meaning that all he needed to add was the diagonal frames of animation. But that wasn't to say he was cutting corners, far from it. The level of detail and customization in Matchday was rare for an early 80s game, and just like Matchpoint, the menu options were many. 1 or 2 player single game, knockout tournament, the length of the game, from 5 minutes per half all the way up to the regulation 45 minutes, 3 difficulty levels of amateur, professional and international, 1 to 8 human teams in the tournament, and even an option to change the screen and kit colours. And of course, we got the TV-style walk-on sequence to a rousing rendition of the Match of the Day theme. This was TV sports football in an age where most football games were stickmen and simplicity. Of course, there are limitations with transferring the beautiful game with large graphics to the specky, and speed has taken the biggest hit. The players don't exactly sprint, though you do move faster without the ball, so you can still chase down an attacker, but the lack of a tackle button can be frustrating, as is not being able to jump. Headers are possible, but they do feel more like a deflection than a deliberate pass or shot, though the thrill of scoring a goal with your head is probably even greater because of this. Some nice touches have been made with the visual presentation, such as the player you are controlling being denoted by his socks changing colour, the goalkeeper crouching to show that he's under player control, and the animated crowd and player celebrations. I played a lot of Matchday at a friend's house in 85-86, but it wasn't until I got my Spectrum 128 when I had my own copy of the expanded 128K version, International Matchday. This added extra sound and a neat close-up on the celebrating crowd when a goal was scored, but was the standard game at heart, and revisiting Matchday in 2025 still gives me the same warm feeling as the long winter nights of 86, even if my ability has degraded in the game as much as my fitness has in real life. Matchday, therefore, on the basis that it was eventually bettered by its sequel Matchday 2, receives 7 points. As I mentioned in my Sabre Wulf review earlier, until recently I'd always dismissed the Ultimate games as style over substance, art projects rather than fun playable games. But with good reason to play them for more than just a few seconds, I found a new appreciation, and Nightlaw is no different. As the third in the Sabreman tales, Nightlaw brings the third different game style to the series. While Sabre Wulf was a maze-based arcade adventure, Underworld was a more traditional arcade platformer, Nightlaw, however, creates a brand new genre all of its own. Whilst Ant Attack can probably claim to be the first isometric arcade adventure, Nightlaw saw the birth of the isometric arcade puzzler, and would see many games imitate its graphical and gameplay style, such as Batman, Head Over Heels, Sweevo's World and Hydrafool. Minimising the use of colour to monochrome scenes, with a limited colour HUD, the graphics are really impressive, with Sabreman himself looking great in 3D and the backdrops for each room adding loads of character. Having been bitten by the Sabre Wulf, the aim of the game is to search the wizard Melchior's castle for potion ingredients and brew a cure, but you only have 40 days and nights to do so or the curse will become irreversible. 2 control methods are available, rotational and directional. I'm not sure why anyone would choose the rotational option personally. You start with 5 lives and must solve puzzles to reach further into the castle. These start simple, like moving furniture to reach a cup on a high platform, but they do get trickier, and to complicate matters, whenever the moon comes out, you transform into a werewolf. This doesn't stop you from carrying out your task, but some enemies will be drawn towards the wolf, and some activities are not possible, such as the cauldron won't reveal the next required item while you are the wolf. I suppose your enjoyment of Nightlaw will depend largely on how well you get on with this style of game, but I did find it to be one of the most accessible and forgiving of the type, at least early on anyway, and I expect most will get a lot of fun out of the game. With all the usual ultimate style and presentation, great graphics and a brand new style of play, Nightlaw broke the mould, put another stamp on the ultimate success story and gets 8 points from me. Once again, there are no reviews for They Sold a Million Too, but under the very odd title of Chrissy Compilation, given that this was the June edition of Crash, so was probably on the shelves in May, both They Sold a Millions are mentioned, with the comment that They Sold a Million is a rather ambitious claim, but that They Sold a Metaphorical Million doesn't have quite the same ring. So on with the scores. With another strong showing in the individual game ratings, the average game score for They Sold a Million Too is 7.75. And just like the first edition, I really liked the packaging, and the small design tweaks to the cover more than make up for the slight reduction in font size in the manual. So this scores 8. The total points for the compilation is 31, and with the cover price of £9.95, that's 32 pence per point, which scores 7. And adding all this up on the blank back of the inlay, we find that They Sold a Million Too has scored 76.5% and gets a nifty ZXCCC Megapack sticker. And finally, we reached They Sold a Million 3. Released in October of 1986, it followed the now tried and tested formula of hitting the major holidays, but was this time released a month early so that it could also catch the October half term, something to keep the kids quiet. Again, costing £9.95, this was the first release where all the 8-bit systems carried the same lineup of games. And those games are Ocean's movie license from the Stallone blockbuster Rambo, Activision's own big movie license Ghostbusters, Digital Integration's dogfighting flight sim, Fighter Pilot, and US Gold's conversion of the Irem coin-op Kung Fu Master. Irem's Kung Fu Master seems to be a bit of a Marmite coin-op. Back in the mid-80s, I was a big fan, so when I heard it was coming to the Specky, I was very excited, purchasing it on release weekend in March 1986 from Manchester Arndale Centre and rushing home as fast as the 192 bus could carry me. The conversion was being handled by David Anderson, who'd programmed the Specky versions of Beachhead, Tapper and also Rambo that I've just reviewed. And as the arcade game was fairly simple, with not too many moving parts, I was sure the Spectrum version would do it proud. How wrong I was. Things started well, with a nice loading screen, yet another from master screen stringer F. David Thorpe, and it led into a colourful title screen, with some rather screechy but mildly oriental sounding music. But it wasn't until the game started that it all fell apart. The Kung Fu Master trundles along like he's out for a country stroll, rather than rushing to the aid of a captive princess. The animation is very low on frames, and coupled with the ugly colour clash makes for a very ugly game. But things could still be okay. After all, it's the gameplay that counts, right? But unfortunately, that's a dog too. The aim is simple: kick and punch the henchmen to reach the end of the corridor, defeat the boss, and then move upstairs for the next level. At the top of the screen you get a status bar showing your own health and lives, and a red bar showing the boss's energy. But with only one fire button, the game has lost the punch attack, and with the awful collision detection for the flying kick, you're really down to just the standard and sweep kick controls, which makes the game an incredibly dull walk kick affair. And hybrid flick screen scrolling just slows down things even more, making Kung Fu Master a huge disappointment in '86 and just as big a disappointment now, and deserves no more than 5 points. Anyone who knows me well knows that I've always had a very large, totally platonic man crush on Sly Stallone. In fact, I've always dreamt of Stallone and Michael J. Fox being my two gay dads. But back in '85, when Rambo First Blood Part 2 hit the cinemas, I was too young by a good 5 years to go and see it at the cinema, though I definitely did see it on VHS a year later in '86. So being given the opportunity to be my movie idol was too big a chance to miss. With my shirt off and my school tie tied around my forehead, I loaded the game and was greeted by possibly the greatest ever Spectrum loading screen. Created by, you guessed it, F. David Thorpe again. With excitement rising, I chose joystick controls, entered my name and watched as the game started. That was me, as Sly Stallone, as John Rambo. I was in heaven. But 40 years on, whilst I'm still a Stallone fanboy, I can be a little more objective. An obvious expansion on the standard commando-style arcade shooter, you must help Rambo search through the Vietnamese jungle to find and photograph a hidden prisoner of war camp. But this is a stealth mission, and you've been given strict instructions not to engage, so you only have your knife initially. But it doesn't take long to find extra weapons scattered about, including the film's iconic exploding arrows and rocket launchers. The bare black screen suggests that it's night time, and due to the fairly fiddly controls, it's often best to stay away from the Viet Cong rather than engaging in this first stage. But once you find the POW camp, you find your old friend and comrade, Banks, tied to a post. Now it's personal, so you must switch to your knife, cut Banks free, and escape north to find the rescue helicopter. Once in the chopper, you take over the controls to fly to safety, but you also take control of the rocket launchers to take out a few enemies along the way and divert back to the camp and free the rest of the POWs. But watch out, as the VC also have a chopper, and theirs is bigger than yours. But when has that ever stopped Rambo? Defeat the gunship and fly the GIs to Thailand and freedom. This is another game that I'm a little rusty at, so I didn't even manage to reach the chopper stage in my few short games. But I do have fond memories of those levels, and recommend you persevere and experience them if you can. Rambo is a rare movie licence in that it's both fun to play and a pretty good interpretation of the film's plot. Yeah, it's fairly short, and it's pretty derivative, but whilst it isn't as flashy and all-out action as the movie, it is one of Ocean's few movie licences that actually worked, and I'm going to give it 7 points. Ghostbusters the movie arrived in UK cinemas in December 1984, but by that point, Buster Mania was already in full swing. Ray Parker Jr.'s theme song had already spent 3 weeks at number 1 in September, and in November, Activision released David Crane's video game adaptation of the film. The game sees you set up a Ghostbusters franchise in a city where the psychokinetic PK energy levels have started rising. You start with a modest bank loan and must purchase a vehicle and equipment to help detect and catch and contain the ghosts. There are plenty of options available to you, with 4 cars, including a station wagon and a very expensive high-performance vehicle. But with limited funds, I expect most of us chose the 1963 hearse. Using a small forklift, you then must upgrade your vehicle with 3 pages of items to choose from, including a PK energy detector, marshmallow sensor, ghost bait, traps and a ghost vacuum. Most of these items are pretty essential to get the most out of the game, but getting a decent number of traps is a must. Once kitted out, you'll hit the streets and wait for the call to race to sites of ghostly activity, represented by red flashing city blocks. With your destination chosen, we get to see your ghostmobile heading along the roads, and if you're lucky enough to see a ghost on the way and have purchased a ghost vacuum, then these can be sucked up, though doing so doesn't seem to have any effect on your score or the PK levels. Once you arrive at curbside, you'll see an erratic Slimer ghost and must set your traps, being careful not to cross the streams, and bust that ghost. Then on to the next until your traps are full, at which point you must head back to HQ to empty the traps. Should you fail to capture the ghost, then one of your 3 crew will be slimed. If 2 get slimed, then you're going to need to head back to GHQ again and revive them. Furthermore, if you cross the streams of your proton packs, at any point, a visit home is also required. If you're lucky, at some point a marshmallow alert will commence and you must press the B key before the 4 pieces of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man combine to earn a cash bonus from the mayor. And at high level, that's it basically for Ghostbusters, as you rinse and repeat until the PK energy reaches 9999. At this point, if you've earned at least $10,000, you'll be able to confront Zool, and if not, your busting days are over. Confronting Zool, however, is a bit of an anticlimax, as all you really need to do is sneak past the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man into the tower by the front door. At that point, the game ends with a success message and you're given a new bank account number that acts as a save code, allowing you to access extra funds on future plays. The original C64 version of Ghostbusters was created in just 6 weeks by repurposing code for an unused game called Car Wars, and it's a shame that more time couldn't have been afforded to it, as if the driving section was improved, with hazards, more ghosts and other objectives, the resource management elements enhanced, and a proper ending level created, then Ghostbusters could have been incredible. But releasing the game as it was, at a price of £9.99, left a lot of buyers disappointed. Though I have to say, not me. I didn't buy it at full price, instead getting the Ricochet re-release for £1.99, and I really enjoyed playing it. So at £9.99 I would have felt a little cheated myself. But at £1.99 it was pretty great value, and on this compilation for the equivalent of £2.50 it is too. So I'm going to score Ghostbusters 7 out of 10. Our last game is Fighter Pilot. Written by DK Marshall and released on his own software label Digital Integration in 1983, it's a massively improved update of his 16K ZX81 game released a year earlier. The ZX81 version was interesting as there were no graphics, just an instrument panel, and there was no fighter in at all, just piloting. The Spectrum version introduces a shiny new graphical HUD, 3D world and many new gameplay options, from landing practice, flight training and crosswind and turbulence simulations, all the way to air-to-air combat dogfights. I'm about as far as you can get from a flight sim buff, but for a 1983 game I'm already impressed with what's on offer, so let's start an air-to-air combat game and see if I can get my US Air Force F-15 Eagle Air Superiority Jet Fighter off the ground. Okay, so the first task is to increase the thrust and head down the runway. When I'm at about 200 knots, I'll pull back on the joystick to take off, remembering to press U to raise the undercarriage. Well, that was simple. Maybe I'm getting the hang of this flight sim lark. The hood is nicely represented with radar on the left, speedo, flaps information, pitch and roll, altitude, flight angle, flight computer, fuel, undercarriage, thrust and ammo, all displayed without things looking too cluttered. But the view out of the window is very bland. Just blue sky, green land and not a cloud in sight. This obviously makes any sense of speed almost impossible, as nothing changes on the screen unless you're banking or have a base or enemy in view. Pressing M brings up your map, where we can see my F-15 Eagle near the centre of the screen and the enemy fighter in the bottom right. The aim is to destroy the enemy plane before it can reach and destroy each of the 4 bases. So with bandits at 5 o'clock, I'll change course and attempt to engage him in a dogfight. Once on track to intercept, I need to switch on the combat mode, which will bring up my machine gun crosshairs, as unfortunately there are no guided or heat-seeking missiles available. I also need to engage the flight computer, which will give me information on the altitude of the enemy plane, enabling me to get within range. A quick check of the map and a course change, increased speed, and we're almost ready to press play on our Top Gun soundtrack cassette tape. Of course, this 2 or 3 minute review footage is heavily edited, as in reality it took me about 5 minutes just to catch up to the plane. But once the bogey's finally in view, the action can really start. Except this is the bit I really sucked at, and I didn't manage to take the enemy invader out, no matter how much I tried. Instead, I just danced around and took a few hits myself before running out of ammunition. Now, with no means of fighting back, my only option was to head to a different base and try to land, refuel and restock my weapons. But with the enemy in hot pursuit, that wasn't going to be easy, and neither was a landing. Under fire, travelling too fast and not being very good at directing my jet, all culminated in a nosedive to the ground and game over. I've got to admit that Fighter Pilot was a lot more engaging than I was expecting. The lack of scenery, single enemy and lack of sound meant that at points it can become a bit tedious, so an autopilot would have been useful to give you a chance to have a stretch, but the level of realism for a 48K game released only a year after the computer is astounding. It hasn't changed my opinion on the genre, but it did give me probably the longest play I've ever had on a single flight sim, so that's got to be worth 7 points. Unusually, They Sold a Million 3 did actually get a full review in the December '86 edition of Sinclair User, where Graham Taylor told us that the latest compilation from Ocean is a possible gem, in that it contains at least one classic program, Digital Integration's Fighter Pilot, calling it certainly the best flight sim on the spectrum. He was less glowing about the other games though, saying Ghostbusters was never much of a game, and Kung Fu Master's graphics were nasty and the game sluggish. But he still gave the compilation a score of 4 out of 5, which I think's very generous. So what of my scores? Well, no game was outstanding, and one was terrible, so the average game score for They Sold a Million 3 comes in at 6.5. With its worsening of the inlay cover design, and almost unreadable font size for a game like Fighter Pilot that really needs it, I can only give the packaging 6 out of 10. And with 26 points for £9.95, we have a pence per point of 38p, and that should give a value for money score of 7. However, that's the same score as the other 2 They Sold a Millions, and I can't really agree that it deserves it, so this has questioned my whole value for money scoring system. To fix this, I'm going to tweak the rules and apply them retrospectively to all the games already reviewed. So going forward, value for money will now have half points. Anything with a pence per point of 5p or less will get 10 points. 6 to 10p will get 9.5 points, 11 to 15, 9 points, and 16 to 20, 8.5 points, etc, etc, all the way up to 96 pence to £1 per point will get half a point, and anything over a quid will get nothing. Using this new scale, They Sold a Million 3 will now receive 6.5 points for value, and what that means overall is that the final compilation in our They Sold a Million special gets an overall score of 64%. Applying this score into the existing league table sees 3 games drop their scores by 1%. Our leader, Arcade Force 4, and both of the Ball Jolly value packs, with Value Pack 48k only holding on to its position above Action Pack Volume 1 by 0.02%. But bigger news is that although the scoring change doesn't affect Volume 2, it does change things for Volume 1, where a value for money score bump of 0.5 has not only increased the overall rating to 80.5%, it's also qualified They Sold a Million for the first ever ZXCCC Mega Hits badge. So let's add the 3 new reviews into the table and see where they sit. So They Sold a Million Volume 1 takes over at the top, with Arcade Force 4 dropping to second, and They Sold a Million Volume 2 also taking the podium in third. In the Constructors' Championship, the average score of the 3 games isn't quite enough for Ocean to overhaul US Gold just yet, so they have to settle for second, with Virgin Games dropping out of the top 3. And as the only series reviewed so far, They Sold a Million sits alone in the series table, but that average score of almost 74% will likely take some beating. Now all that's left after that long slog is to share the links to the great resources used in the making of this series and give you another listen to the featured music. But as always, stick around for the post-credits scene as I continue my reviews of the Cascade Cassette 50 games. Welcome back. We're almost an hour in, so thanks for sticking around. This episode's Cassette 50 game is Manhattan Blitz and was written by Mark Elliott, appearing as the 15th game on side B of the tape. Okay, let's run the game. So, you're running out of fuel and the only way you can land is by obliterating the Manhattan skyscrapers to clear the landing strip. Sounds a bit drastic. Isn't Manhattan near a few large bodies of water? Couldn't you try setting down there and avoiding the massacre of a few million Manhattans? There are 5 skill levels and only one key, B, to drop the bombs. We'll take the middle skill level by choosing number 3 and off we go. Okay, so we have a very red screen with multicolour buildings and your standard Blitz gameplay. The sound's a bit plippy-ploppy, but at least it has some, and the key is responsive enough. So let's see if I can clear this screen and see if there's any special victory message or animation. Now on lower down, the major drawback is becoming apparent. When you drop a bomb, your plane pauses just for a moment, probably to play the sound effect, which means you can continually spam the bomb button and it'll hit every building and removes pretty much any challenge. Ooh, little victory music, and it also records your high score. But what's that? You've landed your plane by bombing Berlin? I thought we were in Manhattan. Excusing that schoolboy error, as Mark Elliott could well have been at school at the time of writing the game, Blitz is a perfectly competent version of a standard game. If you can avoid spamming, it's fun enough for 20 minutes, and is so far one of the better games on the cassette, so I'm going to score it 3 out of 10.